The views and opinions expressed on the Nova Society are those of the panelists and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Phoenix Research Institute or any institution which any panel member is associated. Reproduction or dissemination other than for the purpose of education or information without the express written permission of the Phoenix Research Institute or Nova Society Media is strictly prohibited.
I'd like to welcome everyone back to the Nova Society. I'm your host, Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, and today I'm here with my panel, Dr. Scott Gershwer and Dr. Mark Bound. Today, our panel will again be answering questions from our listeners. Today's question comes from Alicia, who lives in Golden, Colorado. Alicia asks, with all the talk about election security, does the panel think this 24's election will be a free and fair election?
Good question. Thank
question.
you.
Yes.
Yep. And the second question part is which foreign country does the panel believe might be trying to interfere the most?
Oh, that's an interesting question too. Free and fair elections, yes, I believe they are, but it all depends on who you ask. I think Trump is already geared up to, on day number one, say it was rigged.
He's already saying it.
Yeah. He's and you know what? Even when he was doing his photo op there in the McDonald's, where the customers were actually selected to be, you can't even do the real public. You've got to have stooges come up there for you. When asked by the reporters, they asked Trump. They said, "Well, are you going to accept the election?" He goes, "Absolutely, if it's fair." And in his definition, fair is if he wins. So the table's already set.
Right. It's the aftermath of the election that is going to be the problem. The election itself, it's really just too difficult to rig elections in America. It's a local thing. Not one person's vote really matters all that much. There are so many people voting. And it reminds me, and I think I've said this before on a podcast, that when you're a little kid and you're invested in Major League Baseball and it gets to be June, they have all these ballots for the All-Star game at the game, right? And I've seen, we used to do it. I did it myself when I was in 4th or 5th grade. You grab as many ballots as you can and you put your favorite players in there and you send it in, right? And then you're disappointed because your player didn't get chosen. Felix Millan was never an all-star as far as I can remember. And he was one of my favorite players. Jerry Grody was never an all-star and he was one of my favorite players. And all of us putting those, checking those boxes and sending those cards in, for all the time we spent doing it, it had not one bit of difference in the all-star voting because it's a big country. And that's just at baseball stadiums. Now we're talking about every municipality, every small town, every county in America, over 3,000 counties. And it's hard. Now, can you do voter suppression? Yes, of course you can. Can you slow people down to the point where they get tired and turn around and walk away? Absolutely. We've seen people do that. I believe in 2020, Houston, Texas, the entire city of Houston, Texas, had one ballot drop box for the entire place. And, if you couldn't get to that drop box and put your vote in, you weren't doing early voting, which meant that you were going to have to go to the polls. And then if you were in certain areas that were known to be anti-Trump at that time, the lines were long. We heard about you can't give water to people online and all these things designed to get people to turn around and not vote. Those things are always possible. Was it possible for Cambridge Analytica to suppress the vote in 3 cities in the 2016 election? Absolutely, it was. They did a really amazing job with that, putting out there that Hillary Clinton was part of the drug war that incarcerated so many black men unfairly for the same crimes that white people were going for free, and that suppressed the vote in those cities that ordinarily would turn out in massive amounts for Democrats. But that's not the same as rigging an election. It's a tactic that is underhanded and typically Republican, but it is not rigging an election. I don't think that anybody really needs to worry about the election itself being fair and free. I believe it will be. I mean, Elon Musk is probably pushing the line a little with this lottery that he's doing in Pennsylvania, offering $1 million a day to people who sign up and raffle, and raffling off $1 million to the people who are signing up the most people for their petitions and all that kind of stuff. That's coming a little bit close to the line there, but it's not crossing it. I think Republicans would be going berserk about it, and Democrats aren't, which is fairly typical of the two different philosophies of the parties and the people who are in them. I don't think that anybody's going to influence this election other than the quality of the two candidates, and that is stark. As far as who's going to influence the election, everybody wants to. The more chaos we have, the better it is for everybody else in the world. Whether it's Russia, China, Iran, wherever, whoever else, they can't build themselves up to be a United States of America, but they can try to tear us down. And our freedoms are weaponized against us in some cases. Freedom of speech is weaponized against us. And these outside influencers, have a great platform, a number of them. Twitter is, if you ever look at it, has just become a sewer for misinformation and disinformation campaigns. And of course, they're going to work as hard as they can to throw this election into chaos. Interestingly, both Russia and Israel, the leaders of those countries, have a vested interest in seeing Donald Trump become the next president. It may actually be that Arab Americans in really important swing states like Michigan don't come out to vote for Kamala Harris in protest for the Biden administration, which will bring them Donald Trump, who will not stop for a second to allow the Israelis to march every Palestinian out of the West Bank at the end of a bayonet and say, you want to call it ethnic cleansing? This is ethnic cleansing. We don't care. We're doing this anyway, and Trump won't make them pay for it at all. So if you feel the need to temper your vote for things that matter to you, don't change your vote. Don't allow Trump to become president and make things worse for the people that you're trying to help. That is a crazy thing to do, and I think some people are on the verge of doing it.
As far as the vote is concerned, the individual person going to the ballot box, as Scott says, it is a very local kind of thing. There is no danger that that's going to be compromised in any way. It's not like it's some federally run thing. Individual precincts to report to the individual counties who report to the state, and then the state gives the votes to the feds, but it's already been vetted and checked and everything else from there. I don't think that that's even a concern. 5,000 dead people are not going to be voting. People that are unregistered are not going to be voting. That's a lie, plain and simple, because those poll workers who are your neighbors, and people really need to remember this, these people are your neighbors. They're people that you live next door, that when you're out cutting the grass, you're waving to, maybe sitting down and having a beer afterwards. These are your friends and neighbors that are taking the time to go to and be poll workers and do the job, dignity and honor and fairly. That's really what we have to remember. I honestly don't think any foreign country is, as Scott did say, there's a lot of countries that have a vested interest in this. If Trump wins, this is an early Christmas present to Putin and North Korea. Plain and simple. It's an early Christmas present to them because this is exactly what they want. Not so much for the Palestinians. And I would agree with Scott in the sense that if you think that you're going to protest Biden's handling of this conflict in the Middle East with Israel right now, think a little ahead of that. Think what it could be if Trump was in power. And I think Scott's exactly right. He's just going to tell Israel, do what you want. In fact, here, I'll give you everything you need to be able to do it. The true danger to this election, as far as interference is concerned, the enemy from within. It isn't from without. Those who try to suppress the vote, those government agencies. And when I talk about government agencies, I'm not talking about federal. I'm talking about local. I'm talking about your local election people. I'm talking about your state legislatures that create these rules that basically suppress the vote to be able to, in my mind, rig the election one way or another. And this is a purely Republican strategy. It is a well-known fact that the more people vote, the less well Republicans do. They want to keep the vote count down. Thankfully, a lot of the state Supreme Courts have said, wait a minute, we're way too close to Election Day to make these changes. You want to do it next time around, but do it earlier. And this desperate attempt to suppress the vote, that probably is, in my mind, greatest example of election interference that we have to face, and probably is the most dangerous. I think that's far more dangerous than anything Russia or Iran or China or any of the rest of them can do. Those attempts from within the state governments, the county governments, the one county, I think it was Luzerne County, where the county manager, city manager took away the drop box, even though the board said it would stay, and they were forced to put it back. And to say it was because of safety reasons. What did you think? It was somebody's going to fall over the doggone thing? I mean, come on. These are the kind of things that, to me, is attempting to influence an election and doing it from within. And that would be the group I would be most worried about.
I wanted to add a couple of points regarding the dead people who vote. I was listening to the head of the elections for one of the larger cities, and he said the only time a dead person votes is if the person is doing mail-in voting, fills out the ballot, and mails it in, and then dies before Election Day. Those things do happen, but of course they are rare. Disinformation, like from Marjorie Taylor Greene, who claimed that the voting machines in Georgia weren't working properly, and that turned out to be a voter who had made a mistake on the voter's own ballot, not the machine itself. Elections officials, rather, being frightened to work, being given death threats, and so forth. And as Mark said, these are our American friends and neighbors, and it's just the treatment that people like that, who are simply trying to uphold the Constitution and do an honest and genuine and authentic count of votes, so that we can have an election in this country that is free and fair, is entirely inappropriate.
And look, it's going to cost America's mayor his penthouse apartment in Manhattan, who the judge has ordered to turn over to Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss to make up for the amount of money that he owes them for defaming them in the last election. So there's a cautionary tale out there for people who are going out and saying things that are clearly untrue about the elections and or intimidating people who are simply being good citizens by working on elections.
And the idea of it's a rigged election, that's an excuse, because that's the only argument they can possibly come up with. My guy didn't win. And that is a fifth grade argument. They must have cheated. My guy didn't win. And as Scott said about the idea of voting for people for the All-Star game in baseball, I did the same thing. Of course, I didn't pick Felix Millan. I was more like Tom Seaver, who was more of a person maybe that was going to get in. Although I have to admit, I did Ed Kranepool every single year. People have to understand, in a democracy, you have to be prepared to lose. When you lose, it doesn't mean there was any shenanigans, there was anything wrong with it. That's the way it is.
We still want to get Kamala Harris 100 million votes, so get out there.
We would like to see that.
I'm actually voting
and
today.
We also, wow. Oh,
yeah, Connecticut for the first time ever has early voting. Began on Monday.
Wow.
My daughter is home from school, so she's never voted before. I'm going to take her over there and we're going to vote.
Good for her.
Good for you. Good for her and you as well. The other point I wanted to make to our listeners is we need to pay attention to the House of Representatives. If the Democrats take the House of Representatives, we will have a Speaker Jeffries, and Speaker Jeffries will certify the election to the appropriate and duly elected winner, regardless of whether that is Harris or Trump. If the House stays in Republican control and we have Speaker Mike Johnson and Harris wins, Trump will still declare himself the winner, and Mike Johnson has already indicated his willingness to not certify. And he has indicated that in 2020 he would not have certified. So it's very, very important that the House go to the Democrats, because with a Mike Johnson speakership, Trump still will have a path for the, I believe it's the 12th Amendment putting the election into the House of Representatives and giving the presidency to Trump, even if he loses. Do please remember the House of Representatives and for whom you vote there. So thank you for the excellent question, and we will see you all again next time on the Nova Society.
So that's all the time we have for today's episode. The Nova Society is a production of the Phoenix Research Institute. We'd like to thank our sponsors for this episode. BH Conflict Resolution Services, a full-service dispute resolution firm offering expert and cost-effective mediation services to couples, groups, and businesses. BHCRS can be reached at www.bhcrs.com. We'd also like to thank our podcast partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, our editing partners, and Podkite, who does all of our analytics. iHeartRadio, where people get their music and podcasts, Apple iTunes, the largest source for music and podcasts on the internet, Spotify, the most popular source for the Nova Society. The Nova Society is available on all of these and other quality platforms. We'd like to thank all of our listeners. Without you, the Nova Society would not be possible. If you have a comment, question, or would like to be a guest on the Nova Society, we can be reached at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. Always remember, the power of society is knowledge. So for Dr. Scott Gershwer, Dr. Priscilla Hobbs, Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, and all of us here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Be well, and we hope to see you again next time.